In Last Epoch, our amount of third-party tools are not as vast as other ARPGs, like, of course, Path of Building for Path of Exile or Diablo 3's Skill Planner. This means that it is very hard to just find a build or look up other people's creations so that you can learn more about mechanics to apply to your own setup. Sure, you could just type into YouTube and try to find some builds, but generally, most of the YouTube landscape right now for Last Epoch is very poor in quality. And that means that there are a lot of people, a lot of new people, that generally get misguided. Now, the reason why I find this important is a lot of people, a lot of the new people, especially when multiplayer comes, they don't have the time to make their own build. People are busy and they have work, or they have a family, or they have other obligations. Not everyone has insane amounts of free time to work on builds like I do. This means they rely on other people to give them a little bit of a push into endgame. Then when they get there, they can start understanding the game, and when they get their first character leveled up and set up, they can just start experimenting. Now, I wanted to showcase a third-party tool that has had some updates recently and how that will help the average new player, which might alleviate some of the problems we've had with the new player experience. Hello, this is Dread from Epic Builds, where I talk about a lot about Last Epoch and other ARPGs, and showcase the builds I work on. If you enjoy this kind of content, I'd suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as it's the best way to show me that you want more of this. Alright, so we are actually in browser with the third-party program I was talking about, the Last Epoch Build Planner. Now, I have a few issues with the planner myself, but it is the only tool that we have, and it is, of course, the best tool that we have for planning your own build. We do have Tunk Labs, but that's a lot more about learning about numbers and how like armor works and stuff like that. And it's not really about making a build. While this allows you to essentially plot out an entire build and share builds with other people. Now, this is great, right? Now, recently, he also added a build section so that whenever anybody posts a planner or on the forums or on YouTube, they can actually show up on this list here. And you can go like use skill, use unique, author. Like for instance, we can look at myself here, right? All of my builds show up. Now, this is great, but it also doesn't really have what I call a quality control. Like anybody could make a post on this. Like you could be playing for 5 hours and make a post on this if you wanted to. And that definitely leads to a lot of frustration for the new player, because there are definitely a lot of people that will go out of their way to try to get you to click on their stuff without actually putting in the work required to make quality content, right? This is YouTube we're talking about. Happens all the time. Like look at like there's so much stuff in regarding to just like YouTube clickbait and all that, right? And I try not to be one of those people. Now that's where this comes in. He has actually made a new section called a build guide section. This allows people to actually make their own guide inside the planner. And now what do I mean by that? Like let's click on this one by Lizard here, right? It's actually a full written guide, right? There are plenty of people in the Last Epoch community that I know that play the game a lot but don't have time to make a video. And they are really good at the game, but they just don't really like making videos for some reason or whatever. And the current forums for Last Epoch are rather unhelpful in that regard. And that's what this is for. This allows anybody to essentially make their own guide and, you know, just make a full guide. Now, the reason why this is important is because generally people who will put more effort into their stuff will actually type a lot more, right? Like, as you can tell here, this person has played this build, Lizard, I know him. He's played this build to the point where he can actually give a good amount of info, and you can tell that it's of quality. And this also has, of course, a link to the video if they have one. They have like leveling, like there's so many different things that they have for just this build website part. They also have this section where we have the discussion. This is very, very, very important, right? Because this isn't moderated by, of course, the person who made the build. It's moderated by Dammit and his forum, which means that if somebody makes a hoo-ha build, like terrible whatever trash that you see on YouTube sometimes, you'll see it here. You'll see people talk about it here. And that gives people a lot more power in terms of policing the bad stuff, right? And that's great, right? So all you have to do to make your own, you can essentially just create a build guide. You're gonna have to log in to the forums, and then it just gives you all the tools. It does it all for you. It makes it very easy to do so. I've actually logged in and messed around with it a little bit. It's really good. I'm actually surprised at how good it is, actually. Like I was a little like, at the beginning, but then I looked into it a lot more and I realized that the system is actually really good. It's really good form. And I wanted to point it out and tell people that it exists because I'm not the only person that makes builds in this game. It may look like it if you look through all of my uploads and stuff. It may look like I'm the only person that uploads for this game, but I am not. There are plenty of other people that play this game that make builds. So now for the rest of this video, I'm actually going to go through all 4 builds here, right? And we're going to talk about the builds in depth, and I'm going to like tell you my thoughts on them, right? And I might make this into just a general series when the game comes out and like there's more guides here. I can actually go and rank some guides and talk about them and review them too, right? You know. So the first one, of course, is a very popular build. It's called Bow Mage. That's what a lot of people call it. I call it Icicle Marksman because you're utilizing essentially the icicle from Reign of Winter and you're scaling that. It's a spell and you're scaling it with Morning Frost. So on bow hit, you have a chance to cast an icicle at an enemy. Now, that icicle pierces all enemies. It's a spell projectile. It scales off of attunement and dexterity, I believe, and it's a spell. It's a cold spell, right? Now, it's very strong, but on top of that, we utilize Morning Frost to get a bunch of dexterity to scale it even further, because as a bow, right, and a marksman, you don't really have many ways of scaling spell damage. So Morning Frost is the main way of scaling that flat spell damage to make the build function and actually do damage. Now, since we don't have any spell crit on this build, this is one of the main builds that benefit from critical strike vulnerability. So if you don't know what critical strike vulnerability is, it is a ailment that is actually in the bottom half of the marksman tree that allows you to apply a debuff to the enemy that makes it so they have like a 5% increased chance of being crit. That is a more multiplier of being crit. It is additive with base crit, and essentially each stack gives you 5%. So you have 5%, 10%, 15%, and you can stack the ever-living crud out of these stacks on an enemy with a Reign of Winter and icicles because you just have that many hits because your icicles are hitting, your multi-shot is hitting, your detonating arrow is hitting, everything's hitting and applying crit vulnerability stacks, which means you actually don't need base spell crit, which allows you to essentially play the build. And you can also abuse this extra hits to apply a large amount of shred as well, and that essentially makes the build function. That's how this build functions. Now, there's a lot of other stuff you can do. You can run an armor arrow guard to get glancing blow cap, which is great. It's a great idea. Just this whole build is really good. Like, I can 100% suggest this build. He goes into it in depth. I know Lizard. He plays this a lot. It's a really good build. And he even has a video associated with it as well. I would suggest leaving a comment on it as well. Tell them that Epic Builds saw this as well. But yeah, that's the first build guide I want to talk about. Now, the second one is Torquerfin Umbral Blades Blade Dancer. Now, essentially, how this build works is Umbral Blades, you cast it on the ground, and it does like a little spinny. And as it does that spinny, it applies dots. It applies hits to enemies. Now, it'll apply that for the full duration. And essentially what you're doing is you're taking Torquerfins. Now, Torquerfins gives you a stack of Viscera. Now, what Viscera does is it gives you a lot of bleed chance and bleed effectiveness per 5% uncapped physical resistance. So if you have like 500% physical resistance, right, you'll have about 500% bleed chance and 100% bleed effectiveness. And this will apply to the whole duration of the spinny blade of the spinny blade. And I'm going to show it here, actually. We can actually watch the video real quick. Tarek actually makes pretty decent videos. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to use the Torquerfins, apply it on the ground there, and it does an insane amount of bleed damage, right? That's the concept. This makes it really good for bosses, right? And that's why Torquerfins is so good with this build. And this is why actually Torquerfins got nerfed into the ground, is because of this build, which is sad because I really like Torquerfins, but it needed the nerf because of this build existing. Now, as you can tell here, there's a lot of info talking about the build. There's actually a video associated with it. Myself, I don't really like Umbral Blades, like the spinny blade, but a lot of other people like it, and it's really good for bosses. I would heavily suggest this build as well. This build's really good as well. Now, the third build here, we actually have Shadow HOA Marksman. So this is actually Cold.HOA, a build that is very popular because Tunk, essentially, this is Tunk's build, and he pushed it to like 800 arena as a marksman. That's really strong, right? So essentially the idea is you shoot out HOA, right? And it deals damage over time based on your flat bow damage per second in an area, right? Now, a lot of this build setup is based on area denial. So for instance, you shoot a really big HOA and it deals damage over time in a circle. And essentially it will, let me see if there's some gameplay here. Here you go. Here's some gameplay. And this essentially allows you to kite enemies into that little circle. It'll chill them. It'll slow them. It will deal a lot of damage. It deals an insane amount of damage thanks to the shadow system. And essentially it allows you to push arena really high because you can just kite enemies into your HOA, right? Like he's doing here. Now, this build is a little bit less good in terms of monolith progression. If you want a monolith focused version of this build, I'd suggest Bleed HOA. It allows you to essentially do the same thing, but for monoliths. But if you want to push arena, or if you just want a good, solid all-rounder build, you don't care about speed, you just care about being very strong, it's very SSF friendly as well, because the only thing you need is a Reign of Winter, which is a very easy drop to get. Now, of course, the guide goes through the entire build. This is actually an update of a guide that I put out about a year ago. So it's really cool to see that someone actually took Tunk's build and actually went out of their way to make a, of course, build guide for it. And now the last one we're going to look at today is going to be Dragon Song Cock Marksman. Now, I do not like this build, mainly because I don't like Dragon Song, right? And why do I not like Dragon Song? The biggest problem with Dragon Song is, as you can tell here, with Trickster here. When you attack and you proc Dragon Song's proc, which is like a cone fire damage AoE, it only does it in front of you. It doesn't like auto target the thing that you proc the crit on. So you could proc a crit behind you, right, and proc a Dragon Song proc, but it would shoot in front of you. And that makes it feel a little awkward, but this has insane DPS potential as it's based on just crits, which means it'll work with your shurikens, it'll work with your Umbral Blade, it'll work with your Cinder Strike. Every single hit, even the Dragon Song itself can crit and reproc itself. So the damage is there, and you can definitely scale a lot of damage. It's a lot like Reign of Winter, but it's a lot more bossing oriented and focused, and that's its perk, is just being able to do bosses, which I'm kind of sad that he didn't actually bring up a boss kill in this video, because that's like the most interesting part of this build in my opinion. But yeah, that's another build. And as you can tell from all of the ones that I've shown, they're all quality builds. Like I would play any of these. Like these are all really good. They're people I trust. It's great. And that's why I like something like this existing, as it allows people who normally wouldn't make a video, they can actually go out of their way and make their own guide. All they'd have to do is just like upload some gameplay on YouTube. They don't have to like edit anything. They don't have to record. Just upload some gameplay, make a guide, and bam, they're done. And hopefully this is used properly. With all that being said, this has been Dread from Epic Builds. Go use this website. It's great. Have a wonderful rest of the day.